All right, so before we start, I know I'm not as good of a singer as Tyrone, but I want us to sing a quick song. Anybody familiar with Leroy Cleveland McKenzie? No? Smokey 007? All right, you're born there, you're born there? All right. You're born there, you're born there. Tell them that you're born there. You're born there, you're born there. Tell them that you're born there. You're born there, you're born there. All right, we got the concept. Next slide. Here on the left, we have Maggie Meris. Born in Abaco, born in Marsh Harbor, Abaco. She grew up in Haiti because of politics. She's my mother. She sold peanuts to educate me for most of her life. Humble woman. She lives through McCullough Corner, and every day you could see her striving just to make her kids, the citizens that they are. On the right, we have Margot Bethel, founder and community leader of the Hub Bahamas. The Hub was founded after Margot moved from Toronto, Canada, as an alternative art space to fill her gap for longing, for a needing of social change Margot wanted, and so she started the Hub. So what exactly do these two women have in common, outside of their charismatic, charming personalities and the fact that they are women? Plain and simple, they are both embodiments of what it means to be Bahamian. Now, to say that these women are Bahamian means that, or somehow implies that there's an understanding, a definition, or maybe even a formula to what it means to be Bahamian. See, the reality is, I myself struggled with this formula. When Maggie Meris decided to move back from Haiti at the age of 27, it was my birth that heralded this migration. And if we could just go back to that whole Smokey 007 theory of you're born there, then I am technically not Bahamian, So, with this understanding of me not being Bahamian, but considering myself Bahamian, and the 40th anniversary of independence, this brought me to think about ways that I could challenge this whole definition of the way that we look at what it means to be Bahamian. It's quite easy to say, this is not Bahamian because, this is not from Abaco, or it's not from Inagua, it's not from Cat Island. It's quite easy to say, you aren't Bahamian because you don't speak in a dialect. It's quite easy to say, you aren't Bahamian because you don't look this way. But it's very hard to say what exactly is Bahamian. So, based upon all these questions, last year I kind of came up with this project. I proposed this idea to a few investors, and we thought, okay, I'm going to invite 40 people since we're 40 years old, and we're going to have 40 tea conversations. And the pinnacle of each conversation is going to be, what does it mean to be Bahamian? And quite frankly, that wasn't an easy question at all. You could almost write a dissertation on that. And so every time I ask this question, what does it mean to be Bahamian? The first answer I would get would probably be, well, I guess probably that's what it means to be Bahamian. But on a more serious note, after this long kind of span, there seriously became a working kind of understanding of what it means to be Bahamian. We sort of came to a conclusion that being Bahamian wasn't necessarily a word or a noun that could be written out, that could be said within the space of 2 seconds, but rather being Bahamian was like this common understanding. And so what I did was I spent 2 months in the studio, made 40 teacups and 40 sauces. I invited 40 people to have these conversations, and I documented these conversations. And one of the persons that I invited to have a conversation was Dr. Nico Bethel. She was a former director of culture at the Ministry of Youth, Sports, and Culture in the Bahamas, and a current associate professor at the College of the Bahamas, and I think founder of Shakespeare in Paradise. Many of you guys are familiar with her. But Nico's answer to what it means to be Bahamian was that for her, if you're born in the Bahamas, you're Bahamian. If you choose to work in the Bahamas, you're Bahamian. if you choose to give your service, and when she says work, she doesn't just mean by bypassing taxes in another country, but by giving your loyalty. It's not enough to be Bahamian to just live here and, escape Uncle Sam. Being Bahamian surpasses that. So what I really appreciated about her definition of what it means to be Bahamian is she genuinely went past the 007 theory. Nothing against 007, but she went past that whole theory of just, place of birth being like the reason for nationality. She transcended beyond that. And next to Nico Bethel, one of our own colleagues, Dr. Joseph Gaskins Jr., a current PhD student at, London School of Economics. He's doing his PhD in psychology. And so I thought he would be a very interesting kind of person to ask, what does it mean to be Bahamian? And I was quite surprised when he gave me his answer, actually. He said to me, I don't care about this thing that we call Bahamian, Sure, it's fine that we label things like Chunkanu, or conch salad, or even towing water, or saying boy, or ein, or even collect. Sure, it's good that we label these things Bahamian, but these material forms are all contingent, because if Haitian didn't exist, you wouldn't know what it is to call someone Bahamian. If American didn't exist, you wouldn't have something to compare like this idea of Bahamianness next to. And he says, what's more interesting? What common set of ethics does a Bahamian stand against? This is a better understanding of what it means to be Bahamian rather than, objects or practices. And so he continues, being Bahamian, we've been given this definition of Bahamian as being something that's very Christian, very heterosexual, and very anti-colloquial, meaning that all Bahamians are Christians, and we know that isn't, we know that isn't true. All Bahamians are heterosexuals, we have a certain set of beliefs, and on top of that, all Bahamians say as ein and boy and madasek. What about the Bahamian that doesn't say these things? But the important thing about our conversation there was this whole idea of moving away from the post-colonial. This identity was given to us. This isn't something that we genuinely defined ourselves. There's that famous quote that's being attributed to Winston Churchill. History is the story of the victor. In our context, the victor was the British. So, of course, we're going to be, a family, heterosexual kind of culture. Of course, we're going to have heavy Christian beliefs. Of course, they're going to tell us that we're supposed to be anti-colloquial because this whole idea of exoticism is what they kind of gave us as our identity. And another very important layer of this project was this whole idea of work, production, and value. What does it mean to be an artist in the 21st century? Is having conversations considered work? Am I still going along with the whole Michelangelo kind of theory of this master artist, master craftsman? What space is there for collaboration? So I kind of kept all of these questions in mind while going through this project. And I was really heavily invested in this idea of value. How do we approach objects? Who's to say that, a plastic cup isn't worth the same thing as something that I labored over? How do we transcend these economies that we've been given? And one person that I also invited to have a conversation with me was Katrina Cartwright. She was a former professor of mine, and this wasn't a conversation where she was telling me everything that was wrong with my work in a critique. And so that was a very happy kind of moment. It was a very, very soft kind of moment for me because this became a conversation about student and teacher. Again, a relationship between East and West, because the way that she looks at aesthetics is very influenced, at least this vessel itself is very influenced by West, Eastern ceramic tradition, whereas my vessels were, very Western European kind of aesthetic. And I just found it very interesting that, I'm not the best potter ever, but the mere fact that a past professor could trade an object with me says a lot about, value. And then Michael Edwards was another person that I invited to have this conversation. He also had a very thought-provoking kind of conversation, but for the sake of this presentation, I decided to look at the way that he dealt with the issue of value, because his object has a very long lineage, and I think it relates well with the Bahamian art community, because a lot of our artists have went off to Rhode Island School of Design, and that has just like influenced the identity of art a lot in the Bahamas. And so the object that he decided to trade was the RISD cup that kind of was passed down from generation to generation, maybe, or hand to hand at RISD. And he became that guy that decided not to pass it down, but to keep it. And, you know, for him to trade something that's sentimental, that kind of connects with his years back in his undergrad program as a printmaker and as a painter, I think said a lot about the way that he sees value. And then Antonius Roberts also had it was a very humbling moment to have a conversation with this man, because, you know, he's someone that I consider my mentor, and the object that he traded was also very important, because he was given this as a Father's Day gift, you know, many, many, many years ago by a former student, and today she just so happens to be Jessica Colebrook-Maycock, and she's one of the leading ceramicists in the Bahamas, and she gave them this as a Father's Day gift. And the mere fact that, you know, he could trade something so sentimental for something that I made in a studio 2 months ago that has no real value. There's only sweat, labor, and a ceramic kick wheel attached to it. And then we just have like a couple of slides of other images that were kind of traded. And eventually, I completed the project, and it was very interesting to see the way that 40 people looked at this whole idea of like Bahamianness, what it means to value something, the way that we kind of position our culture in juxtaposition of other cultures. And eventually, I entered the project into the Central Bank of the Bahamas Art Competition, 2013, and it won the prize for the past year, which I'm very proud of. As you could see, students admiring the project. And I got to give a shout out to the Central Bank of the Bahamas, because this year I'll be having my follow-up show, because each year that a person wins the show, you're given an opportunity to show, and I think I'm going to continue this whole tradition of community-related works that kind of function outside of the artist space. So now, you've kind of seen like my practice, the way that I look at art, and the way that I look at community, and the way that I define myself. And so this title, My Brother, The Other, and T, has a very sentimental kind of place for me, because my brother is that person that could easily identify himself as Bahamian, that knows the boy that eat conch salad, that drinks a collect, that goes to Junkanoo, that totes water. You know, there's no question of his Bahamianness, there's no question of his identity. But other is the person like me that was not born in the Bahamas, but gives my life, my dedication, my service, my work, and my art to the Bahamas. You know, who's to say that I'm not Bahamian? But what I find very interesting is if you spell the word brother and the word other, what's the relationship there? Take the B and the R from brother, and what does it become? And T. Also a very interesting object, you know, because the brother and the other that kind of argue all the time, both of them experience that same colonial tradition, you know. Slavery is both relevant, you know, among everyone that we try to separate as not being Bahamian. All of our ancestors had the same kind of legacy. You know, tea is like this very creolizing product. And so for me, working on these kind of projects, I just think a lot about how can my artwork transcend beyond the walls of a gallery? You know, how do I engage a community? How do I push the way that we look at things? How do I push that 1% that's able to engage with art? How do I flip the equation? How do I invite the 99% to come in? And it really all boils down to us rethinking the way that we look at those people, the way we shape these people, and make it our people. Thank you.